meant you were sick of life. This aircraft was called the Widowmaker, and the saying, "one a day in Tampa Bay," became common. Despite its reputation as a pilot killer and 4 official inquiries about canceling the project, the plane outlasted those doubts and achieved an unparalleled safety record. The Martin B-26 should be remembered not for its early reputation, but for proving itself as the top medium bomber of its era, the Marauder. Its first flight took place on November 25, 1940, a sleek, modern aircraft. Just over 9 years earlier, on April 29, 1931, the U.S. saw its first monowing bomber take flight. The Boeing B-9, with a 4-person crew in open cockpits, could carry around 2,000 pounds of bombs over a 495-mile range. Its cruising speed was 130 miles per hour, with a top speed of 165, 50 miles per hour faster than the biplanes it replaced. Boeing's metal monoplane was the predecessor to World War II's bombers, though it was never mass-produced. In 1932, the U.S., supported by most nations at the World's Disarmament Conference, proposed abolishing bombing planes. Even as these hopes were voiced, the Martin Company was developing a bomber that would surpass the B-9. Meanwhile, Nazism was growing in Germany, Mussolini had been in power for 8 years, and Japan was eyeing empire building. The new Martin bomber, the B-10, featured an enclosed crew, a rotating turret, flaps, braked main wheels, and a variable pitch propeller. It housed its bombs internally and could carry 2,200 pounds at 213 miles per hour, faster than the fighters of its time. The B-10 appears strikingly modern today, while the B-9 seems part of a bygone era, though only about a year separated their first flights. The B-10s were designed to operate in extreme conditions, reflecting the growing awareness of the need for airplanes to be ready for full-scale war. When the first B-10s appeared, they were a stunning blend of cutting-edge technology, incorporating the latest ideas, from drag reduction in their design to the strategic potential of bombing. As with all breakthroughs, they sent the world's designers scrambling back to their drawing boards. For a time, it was the most advanced bomber in existence, and the Martin Company was rightfully proud. Martin-built bombers had long been their motto, and building the world's best felt like a natural fit. Various engines powered different models, and there were numerous adaptations of the basic design, including a floatplane version to attract Navy interest. Yet, despite breaking new ground, the mighty B-10 was outdated by the time war began. Although later models could reach speeds of 260 miles per hour with a range of over 2,000 miles, by 1938, the Boeing B-17, capable of carrying 4,000 pounds of bombs, had already surpassed it. The B-10 was lightly armed and carried a moderate load, so it's more fitting to compare Martin's plane to the twin-engine bomber it replaced, which was still in use at the start of the war. The Douglas B-18 had been the runner-up in the competition against the B-17, but due to economic reasons, it secured the majority of orders in the following years. Its performance figures, while better than the B-10's, declined after modifications to increase armor and range, with a top speed reduced to just 215 miles per hour and a smaller bomb load and range than its predecessor. Neither could have handled World War II combat, as they lacked the bomb load, performance, and defensive armament of their European counterparts. Meanwhile, the U.S. had no effective medium bomber available. One failed submission from the Army's 1938 search for a twin-engine attack bomber was the Martin Maryland, which was later sold to France and Britain and evolved in 1940 under British specifications into the Baltimore. Remaining in production until 1944, it saw action in the Mediterranean. Designed 6 years after the B-18 and with lessons from the war, the Baltimore, like the Maryland, had a speed exceeding 300 miles per hour, carried around 1,000 pounds of bombs, and featured powerful forward-firing guns. It was an excellent light attack bomber, though it never found much favor with the U.S. Army. While the Maryland and later the Baltimore were being accepted in Europe, U.S. planners issued a specification in January 1939 for a new medium bomber, emphasizing high speed, long range, and a 2,000-pound bomb load. Absent from the specifications was any mention of wing loading, which implied the plane would have a high wing load along with high takeoff and landing speeds. Essentially, they sought an aircraft that, while sharing performance and size traits with the Baltimore, would carry twice the bombs and double the crew over a longer distance. With war looming, urgency was key, and the extreme parameters reflected the global conflicts and needs at hand. The goal was to push technological boundaries, not merely catch up, but to surpass, regaining the lead once held by the B-10 and complementing the excellent heavy bombers already in use and under development. Martin's Peyton Magruder designed a streamlined, cigar-shaped aircraft with the smallest practical wings and powerful engines, creating a plane that immediately looked right. With a 5-man crew, navigator, pilot, bomb aimer, and 2 gunners, it could carry 3,000 pounds of bombs at 315 miles per hour. Despite carrying 3 times the Baltimore's load, its dimensions were only marginally larger, and its projected performance made it a clear winner in the competition. With the pressing international situation and Martin's reliable reputation, the Army ordered the plane directly from the drawing board. No prototypes were built. The first plane produced would be the first deployed, and 201 were ordered in September 1939. Established in 1909, the company had built a strong reputation and skilled workforce. However, the hand construction usually expected for prototypes wasn't feasible. Mass production processes had to be developed swiftly. The new planes were first flown on November 25, 1940, and entered service in February 1941. Like the B-10, they represented the cutting edge of aviation, with over 20 innovative features, though not as originally designed. The plane's weight had increased, bringing the gross weight to 27,000 pounds, which led to a high wing loading of 53.2 pounds per square foot. These figures, as we will see, would continue to rise. The Marauder was a sturdy aircraft with a semi-monocoque fuselage built in 3 sections. Despite issues with some components, like the Curtiss electrically operated variable pitch propellers, the construction quality at Martin remained top-notch. As the first B-26s were being assembled, engineers worked closely with factory workers refining the design. The crew size increased to 7, adding a second pilot and a radio operator, while orders for the plane continued to grow. With the British still having Baltimores built and the Navy purchasing flying boats, additional factory space was needed, leading to the construction of a new plant in Omaha to boost production. The Marauder featured two 50 caliber guns in the first power-operated dorsal turret on an American bomber, as well as a hand-operated tail gun. A 30 caliber gun was mounted in the bombardier's nose cone. However, as with all bombers, the guns, while effective in downing enemy aircraft, proved insufficient for defense. The hard lessons of needing fighter escorts or clear skies were still ahead. Over time, additional guns were added, with later Marauders carrying 11 50 caliber machine guns. The interior, packed with equipment, was purely functional. It may have housed 7 men for long missions, but it was far from comfortable. The Marauder was a war machine, stripped of any frills. Without prototypes or test aircraft for thorough evaluation, Martin proceeded directly to full production, with Marauders rolling off the assembly line in increasing numbers. Despite facing immense challenges, this steady production continued uninterrupted until the last B-26 was built in 1945. The first planes were assigned to the 22nd Bomb Group, a seasoned unit that had been together for 2 years. With minimal fanfare, the Marauder entered service with the group and was quickly deployed to the Pacific after Pearl Harbor, operating from Australia in the New Guinea campaign. Flying unescorted, long-range missions, the planes endured heavy punishment, proving their durability. Among the aircraft in combat with the 22nd was the third Marauder ever built, whose final mission ended in battle. With skilled pilots and strong unit cohesion, the 22nd became highly effective, eagerly embracing their new planes. As they gained combat experience, their admiration for the Marauder grew. They soon concluded that their planes were the best of their kind, and they weren't shy about voicing that opinion. The support of combat crews was crucial in the coming months as the Marauder began gaining a negative reputation back in the States. Pilots in training were dying in their B-26s. At MacDill Field in Florida, planes were crashing into the sea at a rate that led to the infamous rhyme, "one a day in Tampa Bay." Although the actual rate was closer to one a week, something had clearly gone wrong. Many quickly concluded that the project should be scrapped. The B-26 was a fast, high-performance aircraft that required well-trained pilots, but it was during training that it earned the nickname Flying Coffin. Despite selecting pilots after rigorous physical and aptitude testing, the Army struggled to adequately prepare them to fly the Marauder. Crashes continued, and the aircraft's small wings led to the nickname the Baltimore Whore, implying the plane had no visible means of support. While the Marauder was indeed heavily loaded, experienced pilots found it flew beautifully. The problem arose as the Air Force rapidly expanded to unprecedented size, with many new pilots and trainers lacking experience with twin-engine aircraft. Going from docile, forgiving trainers to the powerful and demanding Marauder was simply too much for many recruits. If not for the enthusiasm of the crews flying the Marauder in combat, the first Board of Inquiry might have scrapped the project in 1942. Adding to the praise from the Pacific was the Marauder's success in the North African campaigns. The British had received some of the new bombers, deemed them suitable for tactical use, and deployed them to the desert, where experienced crews were thrilled with their performance and wasted no time in spreading the word. As the fighting continued and German counterattacks weakened, more B-26s arrived in the theater and joined operations. They weren't just used as bombers, they intercepted slow-moving German Gigant transports over the sea, sending both the planes and their cargo to the depths below. Marauders harassed enemy front lines, disrupting supply lines, both at the front and across the Mediterranean. This stranglehold on resources eventually spelled the end of Axis resistance. While some German units fought to the bitter end, once the Allies gained control of the skies, the Afrika Korps couldn't sustain a defense. The jubilant French population celebrated their liberation with parades and dancing, marking the exit of Axis forces from Africa. German airfields were littered with wrecked Luftwaffe planes, standing as silent proof of the effectiveness of tactical bombing. Meanwhile, back in the US, inquiries into the accident rate and training continued, leading to changes in the Marauder, including a larger wing designed to reduce landing speed and wing loading. This change was clearly necessary, but what wasn't needed was for the gains from the larger wing to be offset by additional weight. Unfortunately, the new wing came with extra gun nacelles and other innovations, which added weight and left the aircraft with no real improvement in wing loading. The figure now stood at 58 pounds per square foot, with the plane weighing over 37,000 pounds. The test pilots were tasked with assessing how these changes affected the aircraft, particularly its takeoff and landing behavior. The testing yielded a consistent result. In the hands of experienced pilots, the B-26 performed well. Even with an extra 10,000 pounds beyond the designer's target, the Marauders won over their crews, providing strong validation of the design. The test pilots, highly skilled aviators by nature, recognized what the B-26 was intended to accomplish. This was no ordinary aircraft. It was a high-performance machine. The pilots became intimately familiar with the B-26, and notably, a few were retained at Wright-Patterson for general testing and use as chase planes. While debates about the bomber's safety continued in America, production remained deficient at the Martin plant, and more groups of B-26s were deployed. As longer-range aircraft took over in the Pacific, the center of Marauder operations shifted to Europe. Serious doubts arose again after the second mission flown from Britain turned disastrous, with the entire raid lost to flak, fighters, and a collision. However, as always, calm voices pointed to the plane's evident successes, and the Marauders remained in service, albeit used more conventionally and not at low levels for some time. Europe would become the theater where the B-26 ultimately proved its worth. Following the initial shock of losses, crews adapted to the demanding routines of combat, and the Marauder's reputation began to stabilize. It's not surprising in retrospect that it vindicated itself in battle. Martin had invested significant time and expertise into the design, despite the rush to production. Among the issues faced, weight increases had led to a series of accidents due to landing gear failures, prompting the strengthening of wheel struts. The Hudale bomber, towing its loaded B-26 strut, underwent extensive testing, with all components rigorously evaluated, though not always in such an unusual manner. Tests assessed various wheel angles, ensuring that the infamous wings were not gambles, but rather carefully calculated for safety and performance. If there had been any fundamental inadequacy, the plane wouldn't have been able to take off under the heavier loads that the Army expected. Initial calculations were validated. The B-26, while demanding, was both safe and reliable. A testing program holds little value if it only examines the most favorable conditions. Aircraft tests often continue until a part fails, revealing the limits of design, such as potential buckling of the wing surface. The treatment developed for the components in these laboratory settings was, to put it mildly, extreme. Every part of the plane represented a deliberate and logical choice, often involving some compromises, but the designer's commitment to excellent performance is clear from their decisions. With a small wing, the design placed significant demands on the pilot, particularly regarding training. The company made every effort to protect the crew, experimenting with various combinations of armored glass to withstand bullet impacts. However, no amount of design could shield the crew from the disastrous mix of a rapidly expanding air force and the B-26's intolerance for mishandling. Crashes involved not only trainee pilots, but also inexperienced ground crews and mechanics. Once units were fully trained and prepared for combat, accidents decreased rapidly, and the universal praise for the B-26 from its operators persisted. Moreover, under the newly formed 9th Air Force, the Marauder excelled in disrupting enemy communications. With fighter cover, the 8 B-26 groups of the 9th undertook medium-altitude, high-precision attacks. The increasingly overwhelmed Luftwaffe struggled to counter the precise assaults on communications throughout occupied territories. The momentum of Allied air dominance grew, critically impacting the Nazis' ability to resist invasion and contributing significantly to the war's outcome. The facility that produced the Marauder also had a legacy of crafting the first production bomber designed in the United States back in 1918. Martin was a company with a rich tradition and deep pride, and the criticism of the B-26 had taken a toll on them. Their highly skilled and valued workforce produced aircraft that were second to none, and the company's history of pioneering practical, efficient, and well-built planes was a significant asset. With petrol rationing in effect, Martin organized transport for its workforce, implementing carpooling and facilitating public transport options. The impact of the war was palpable at home, not only the carpools and reliance on public transport, but also in the influx of women into the workforce, reflecting the nation's commitment as many young men were sent to fight. Even the company's security force saw a shift, with women filling a substantial number of roles and wearing skirts as part of their uniforms. Looking every bit as organized as any group of recruits, these women were trained by Army drill instructors. Elaborate systems were established to recognize productivity and effort, serving as incentives and boosting collective morale. Each year, the factory opened its gates for a family day, drawing large crowds that showcased the company's size and community. In 1943, as Glenn Martin addressed the crowd, the worst of the Marauder's bad reputation was behind it. In a final effort to lower the landing speed, the incidence of the wing was adjusted. Although this change reduced the plane's speed to 270 miles per hour, it ultimately made the aircraft safer for less experienced pilots. The F and G models began entering service by the year's end. The employees and their families celebrated with a festive atmosphere, surrounded by the bombers displayed around them, a constant reminder of their contributions. Meanwhile, in Europe, the B-26s continued their missions with increasing efficiency as their experience grew. By the war's end, they had flown 129,943 operational sorties and dropped 169,382 tons of bombs, suffering a loss of only 911 aircraft in combat, a loss rate of less than 1%. In contrast, B-26 gunners were credited with shooting down 402 enemy aircraft. Alongside other Allied attack and medium bombers, the Marauders helped reduce Hitler's empire to isolated pockets with shattered communications. Often flying alongside various Allied aircraft, they relentlessly bombed German positions in the lead-up to the invasion and during the ensuing Allied blitzkrieg as the forces advanced toward Berlin. The Marauder gained favor among pilots from multiple nations. Not only were they used by British and American Army and Navy crews, but also by French, Australian, South African, Canadian, and Greek forces. As the model matured, variants for photography, target towing, and training emerged, making it the first Army Air Force aircraft to operate at night in the European theater. With widespread acceptance, the Marauders enjoyed a solid reputation, a long-awaited outcome achieved through hard work and dangerous missions. In Baltimore, the final chapter of the Marauders' story was written as production ceased on March 13, 1945. Mr. Martin delivered a brief speech to a small gathering, and after a few photographs, the era of the B-26 concluded. The last aircraft, Tail End Charlie, was a TB-26G 25MA model, highlighting the many variants that had emerged since the original B-26 first flew 3.5 years earlier. Tail End Charlie was outfitted for target towing and training. Ironically, the second-to-last Marauder, named Middle River Stunt Jump and redesignated as the XB-26H, was involved in testing a new radical undercarriage for the Boeing B-47 Stratojet. This modified aircraft featured tandem main wheels retracting into the fuselage, with outrigger legs replacing the typical main gear in the engine nacelles. The fuselage required special strengthening to handle the landing loads of this innovative design. Testing was sometimes interrupted by gear failures during rigorous maneuvers, as the assembly comprised parts from both B-26s and B-17s. While the Middle River Stunt Jump contributed to preparations for the next generation of aircraft, the advent of jet engines rendered the entire World War II bomber inventory quickly outdated. Although some bombers found a second life in commercial aviation, the B-26, despite having regained favor among its crews, carried a lingering stigma. Coupled with its higher production costs compared to the North American Mitchell, the B-26 vanished from the scene with surprising abruptness. The B-26 Marauder's journey ended abruptly after the war, transforming from a fleet of thousands of aircraft to mere millions of aluminum ingots, scrapped even faster than they had been built. While the French operated the Marauder until 1947, the aircraft quickly faded from the skies. Despite its rugged design and ability to absorb damage, the Marauder played a relatively unsung yet crucial role in the war. It boasted the lowest loss rate of any U.S. bomber type in the European theater, but the price of victory was steep, paid in the lives of B-26 crew members. Many airmen credited the Marauder with their survival, and to this day, veterans argue passionately that their aircraft was the best of its kind. Though some may view their fervor as eccentric, it's undeniable that, with proper training for both flight and maintenance crews, as well as improved control among subcontractors, the B-26 transformed from its notorious beginnings to achieve a commendable record. Despite the early controversies, the Marauder has secured an honorable place among World War II's finest aircraft, remembered fondly by those who flew it and fought alongside it.